You're at a family gathering. Someone at the table starts complaining about younger people being too soft, too online, too sensitive, and you kind of get it. But then you pull out your own phone 5 minutes later and lose 20 minutes scrolling. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice goes, "Wait, which side am I actually on here?" That's not a personality quirk. That's not hypocrisy either. That internal split, that quiet, "I don't fully belong on either side of this conversation" feeling, has been following a specific group of people their entire adult lives, and most of them have never had a real explanation for why. The group is called Xennials, born between 1976 and 1985. Too young to be true Gen X, too old to be a real millennial. They grew up in the last years of the fully analog world, and then watched the internet arrive and rebuild everything from the ground up, right in the middle of who they were becoming. And that experience left three very specific psychological marks. Three patterns that shape how they think, why they tire the way they do, and why, despite feeling like they never quite fit anywhere, they carry something most people around them simply don't have. Let's get into it. Point 1. The analog childhood built a muscle that never gets named. Picture a Saturday morning in 1988. A kid named Jordan is 10 years old and bored out of his mind. There is no device to hand him the next thing, no algorithm queuing up content the second his attention drifts. His options are go outside, read something, or sit there being bored. So he goes outside. He knocks on his neighbor's door. Either they're home or they're not. He figures out something to do with whoever shows up. He navigates disagreements in real time, face to face, with no escape hatch. That sounds simple, but what it was actually doing to Jordan's brain was not simple at all. Every single one of those moments, the boredom, the unscripted social navigation, the arguments you had to resolve because you'd see that person again tomorrow, was quietly building what developmental psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to sit with discomfort long enough to move through it rather than away from it. And right alongside that, it was building something equally important, the ability to read a room, to pick up on what someone means when what they're saying and how they're saying it don't match, to stay present in a conversation even when it gets uncomfortable. Here's what nobody talks about. Those skills didn't come from a curriculum. They came from a childhood that didn't have an exit button. And because there was no exit button, an entire generation had to develop genuine patience, genuine social fluency, and genuine internal resources just to get through an ordinary week. Now, fast forward to today. Those same people are in workplaces where most conflict gets managed over Slack, in relationships where hard conversations can be avoided for days via the excuse of, "I just haven't had a chance to reply," in a culture that has essentially built an exit button into every uncomfortable situation. And these Zennials are the ones quietly noticing that something important is getting lost, but not always having the language to say what it is. So what do you do with this? If you're a Zennial, the thing to understand is that your tolerance for sitting with hard, unresolved things is not just stubbornness or old-fashioned thinking. It's a trained capability, and in a world that increasingly rewards whoever can tolerate discomfort long enough to actually solve the problem rather than just avoid it, that is a genuine competitive advantage. Stop treating it like background noise. Start recognizing it for what it is. Point 2. The belonging problem that never gets solved, and why that's actually useful. Every generation has a story it tells about itself, a shared identity. Boomers have the post-war optimism narrative. Gen X has the latchkey, too cool to care thing. Millennials have the student debt and avocado toast cultural moment. Even Gen Z has built an identity around mental health awareness and digital activism. Zennials have nothing clean. For years, they got split between the tail of Gen X or the leading edge of millennials depending on whoever was writing the article that week. And if you're thinking, so what? Who cares about generational labels? I hear you, but here's what actually matters psychologically underneath all of that. Generational narratives are social mirrors. They exist so that people can look at their own experiences, the struggles, the confusion, the specific texture of growing up in a particular moment, and see themselves reflected back by other people who went through the same thing. That reflection is not vanity. It's one of the core ways human beings regulate their sense of reality. Other people felt this too. I'm not crazy. This is real. When that mirror is absent or blurry, you develop a particular kind of loneliness. Not the dramatic, visible kind, the quiet kind, the kind that shows up as feeling slightly outside every group you join. You fit into conversations everywhere, but you're not sure you belong anywhere. With Gen Xers, you share some references, but not others. With younger millennials, you share some frustrations, but hit a wall at a certain point. You're the person who can connect with almost anyone, but who sometimes goes home and wonders, who actually gets me? Let that land for a second, because I know that hit somewhere real for a lot of you. Now here's where it pivots, because that same quality, the one that made you feel placeless, is the exact same quality that makes you exceptionally good at something most people struggle with their entire careers: empathic range. The ability to genuinely understand people who are nothing like each other, hold their perspectives at the same time, and find the ground between them. Think about your own life. You can sit with someone 20 years older and follow their logic about loyalty and hard work and institutional trust. You can turn around and sit with someone 10 years younger and genuinely understand their relationship to mental health, to flexibility, to the idea that a job should not cost you your identity. You don't have to agree with either of them, but you can actually inhabit both views, which is something most people simply cannot do, because most people only ever learn to see from one angle. This is not accidental. This is what happens when you spend your whole adult life belonging partially to multiple worlds rather than completely to one. You build range. And in rooms that need a translator, someone who can bridge the gap between two sides that have stopped understanding each other, you are the most valuable person there. So what do? Stop waiting to find the group that finally mirrors you perfectly. That search will exhaust you, and it will never end. The real move is to recognize that your belonging was always going to look different from most people's, wider instead of deeper, and that wider in certain contexts is exactly what's needed. The goal isn't to fit, it's to bridge, and you were built for that. Point 3. The invisible burnout and the identity labor nobody named. This is the one I really want you to hear. Zennials burn out, but not in the visible, dramatic way that gets written about. Not the public meltdown or the sudden resignation letter. It's something much quieter and, in some ways, harder to get out from under. Here's how it usually goes. You became the reliable one. Maybe you don't even remember choosing it. It just became true somewhere along the way. At work, you're the person who figures things out. At home, you're the one who keeps things together. In your friend group, you're the one people call when something actually goes wrong. And for a long time, that role fits. You're good at it. Being capable is part of how you know yourself, but there's a hidden tax being charged the whole time. Researchers call it identity labor, and it's the ongoing cognitive and emotional work of managing who you are across multiple different contexts. Every time you shift registers, every time you translate between the world you were built for and the world you actually live in, between what you know a real conversation should feel like and the text thread it's actually happening in, between the pace that feels natural to your nervous system and the pace that modern life demands, that shift costs something. It's like running two programs at the same time on a computer that was only built for one. The computer still works. You'd never know from looking at it, but the battery drains faster, and at a certain point, it just stops fully recharging overnight. You know what that feels like in a body? You wake up after a full night of sleep, and you're still tired. Not sad, not anxious, not sick, just depleted in a way you can't fully name. And because the competence is still there, because you're still performing, still showing up, still being the reliable one, nobody around you sees it. The burnout is invisible from the outside, and that invisibility makes it worse, because you can't even point to it without feeling like you're complaining about nothing. This is the cost of being the bridge person your whole life. The bridge holds the weight. The bridge doesn't get to rest on either side. So what do you actually do about it? 3 concrete things. First, rest stops being something you earn after you finish. It becomes maintenance, like oil in an engine, not a reward, not a luxury. Required upkeep for a system that runs complex operations all day long. Second, name the translation work out loud, not just internally, to another person, to a partner, a close friend, a therapist. Whoever can actually receive it. Something strange happens when you stop carrying invisible labor in silence and start saying, "Here's what I am managing that nobody can see." The weight does not disappear, but it stops compounding. Third, find at least one space in your life where you do not have to translate anything. One relationship, one community, one practice, where you can just be in one register. Not the bridge, not the adapter, not the person holding both ends. Just you. That space is not optional for this group. It is the thing that makes everything else sustainable. 3 things shaped the Zennial psychology more than anything else. A childhood that built real friction tolerance before there was any way to avoid friction. A generational identity gap that, instead of breaking them, quietly expanded their capacity for empathy and range. And a lifetime of invisible translation work that accumulates into a very specific kind of exhaustion. The kind that hides underneath continued competence. None of that is a flaw. All of it is a pattern, and patterns, once you can see them clearly, stop running you from the background. Jordan, from the beginning of this, he's in his mid-40s now. He has been through a career shift, a move, probably a relationship or two that tested everything he thought he knew about himself. And somewhere inside all of that, he figured out how to keep going without losing the thread of who he actually is. That is the Xennial signature. Continuity inside disruption. Staying yourself while the world rewrites its own rules around you. And if you've been doing that your whole life without anyone naming it, consider this me naming it. You were never caught between 2 worlds. You were built to hold both of them at once. And the fact that most people can't do that is exactly why the ones who can matter so much right now.